"You're fired." The words cut through the roar of the workshop louder than any engine ever could. Conversation stopped. Tools froze in midair. Even the mechanics, standing 50 feet away, turned toward the sound. Nathan Brooks slowly lifted his head from the open engine bay and looked at the woman standing across from him. Victoria Hale, the newly appointed CEO of Hale Racing Technologies, stood with her arms crossed and a look of absolute certainty on her face. She had only been leading the company for 6 months, but everyone already knew one thing about her. Once she made a decision, it rarely changed. The massive race facility around them stretched across nearly 20 acres outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Bright overhead lights reflected off polished floors. Championship race cars worth millions sat beneath spotless covers. Photographs of legendary victories lined the walls like sacred relics. It was the kind of place where reputations were built over decades and destroyed in minutes. Nathan quietly set down the wrench in his hand. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply wiped a trace of grease from his fingers with an old shop towel. Around him, dozens of employees watched nervously. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious. A few seemed relieved they were not standing in his position. Victoria took a step closer. "Who gave you permission to touch that engine?" Nathan glanced back at the vehicle. It was the company's newest race car, scheduled for an important test session the next morning. "Nobody," he answered calmly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Exactly. The silence that followed felt heavier than the machinery surrounding them. Nathan could feel every pair of eyes in the building fixed on him. Yet his expression barely changed. "The engine had a problem," he said. "I fixed it." Several mechanics exchanged uneasy looks. Victoria let out a short laugh that carried no warmth. "You fixed it?" "Yes." "You are a maintenance technician." Her voice echoed through the shop. "You are not one of my engineers." Nathan nodded once. "I know." Victoria pointed toward the office overlooking the production floor. "Then you should have reported the issue instead of making unauthorized modifications to a multi-million-dollar race vehicle." Nathan remained silent for a moment. The smell of fuel, hot metal, and machine oil lingered in the air between them. Finally he spoke. "If I had waited for approval, the engine would have failed during testing." The statement landed harder than he intended. A few heads turned. One engineer lowered his eyes. Another stared at the floor. Victoria noticed. Her expression hardened immediately. "That is enough." The finality in her voice left little room for debate. Nathan understood. He had spent enough years in workshops to recognize when a decision had already been made. Across the building, Robert Hayes stood near a workbench reviewing technical drawings. The 70-year-old engineering consultant had witnessed nearly every era of the company's history. Unlike everyone else, he was not watching Victoria. He was watching Nathan. Specifically, he was watching the way Nathan had been studying the race car before the confrontation began. There had been something unusual in his eyes. Not fear, not frustration, recognition, as if he knew the machine personally. Victoria reached into her jacket and removed an employee badge envelope. "Turn in your credentials before you leave." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nathan accepted the envelope without complaint. For a brief moment, the giant workshop seemed almost silent despite the distant hum of equipment. Then he looked back toward the race car one last time. The glance lasted less than 2 seconds. Yet Robert noticed it immediately. The old engineer's expression changed. Something about that look unsettled him. It was not the look of a man worried about losing his job. It was the look of a man worried about the car. Nathan placed the wrench on the tool cart and removed his work gloves. The motions were slow, respectful, controlled, the same way he approached everything in life. 6 years earlier, he had lost his wife to illness. Since then, every decision he made revolved around one person. His 13-year-old daughter, Emily. She was the reason he worked long hours. The reason he never complained. The reason he accepted jobs beneath his abilities without protest. Stability mattered more than pride when someone depended on you. Victoria stepped aside as Nathan began walking toward the exit. The employees parted quietly to create a path. Some offered sympathetic looks. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Nathan accepted neither. He simply kept moving. The afternoon sunlight poured through the massive glass doors at the front of the facility, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Halfway to the exit, he stopped. Not because Victoria called after him. Not because he wanted to argue. His eyes drifted back toward the race car, sitting beneath the bright workshop lights. The machine looked flawless, beautiful, fast, yet something deep inside him remained unsettled. Then he continued walking. Behind him, nobody noticed the concern hidden beneath his calm expression. Nobody except Robert Hayes. And as the old engineer watched the single father disappear through the doors, an uncomfortable thought formed in the back of his mind. Maybe the wrong man had just been fired. The giant glass doors closed behind Nathan Brooks with a quiet hiss. And just like that, 6 years of loyalty ended without applause, without explanations, and without anyone truly understanding what had happened. The late afternoon sun hung low above the Charlotte skyline as he crossed the employee parking lot carrying a small cardboard box. Inside were a few tools, a coffee mug Emily had painted when she was 9 years old, and a framed photograph that had survived every workshop, garage, and repair bay he had worked in over the years. It was not much, yet somehow it felt heavier than anything he had carried before. Behind him, the racing facility continued operating as if nothing had changed. Engines roared. Computers processed data. Executives moved between meetings. The machine kept moving forward. Nathan paused beside his aging pickup truck and looked back one last time. The building shimmered in the afternoon light like a monument to speed and ambition. Most people would have felt anger. Some would have demanded answers. Others would have blamed the CEO. Nathan felt something else. Concern. The same concern that had unsettled him while standing beside the race car. He opened the truck door, set the box on the passenger seat, and quietly drove away. Across town, 13-year-old Emily Brooks sat at the kitchen table finishing math homework when she heard the familiar sound of the pickup pulling into the driveway nearly 2 hours earlier than usual. She glanced at the clock immediately. Her father was never home this early. Never. The front door opened. Nathan stepped inside. Emily instantly noticed the box in his hands. Children often sense things adults try to hide. "Dad?" she asked softly. Nathan offered a small smile. "Hey, kiddo." Emily looked from the box to his face. What happened? The house fell silent. It was a small home. Modest. Clean. Comfortable. Every dollar inside it had been earned through hard work. Nathan placed the box on the kitchen counter and took a slow breath. "I lost my job today." Emily lowered her pencil. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she stood and walked around the table. "Are we okay?" It was the first question she asked. Not why, not how, not who was responsible. "Are we okay?" Nathan felt his chest tighten. He smiled gently and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We are okay." Emily studied his face carefully. "Really? Really?" She nodded slowly. She trusted him. She always had. Later that evening, after dinner, Nathan sat alone on the back porch while the sun disappeared beyond the trees. The air carried the distant sounds of traffic and summer insects. Inside, Emily finished homework while pretending not to worry. Nathan stared into the darkness and replayed the events of the day. Not the firing itself. That part was already over. His thoughts kept returning to the race car. Specifically, the engine. He remembered the unusual vibration, the microscopic wear pattern, the hidden stress developing inside a critical component. Small details, easy to miss, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. He had fixed the immediate issue, but something deeper still bothered him, something that refused to leave his mind. The next morning, Hale Racing Technologies prepared for its major test session. Engineers reviewed data. Mechanics completed final inspections. Victoria Hale arrived before sunrise carrying a tablet and a schedule packed with meetings. Efficiency was one of her strengths. She expected excellence from everyone around her, especially herself. By 8 o'clock, the race car rolled onto the testing track. Cameras recorded every lap. Engineers monitored every sensor. Executives watched from observation decks high above the facility. Everything appeared normal at first. Fast, smooth, precise. Victoria stood beside several department heads and nodded with satisfaction. The previous day's conflict already felt insignificant. Then Robert Hayes quietly stepped beside her. How did Nathan take it? Victoria barely looked up from her tablet. Professionally. Robert remained silent for a moment. "Did you ask why he touched the engine?" Victoria sighed. "He told me he found a problem. And..." She finally looked at him. "And he was not authorized to make modifications." Robert studied the race car speeding around the track below. His expression remained thoughtful. "That was not my question." Before Victoria could answer, A race engineer approached carrying performance reports. The conversation ended, yet Robert's concern remained. Throughout the morning, he continued watching the telemetry data streaming across dozens of monitors. Most people saw numbers. Robert saw patterns. Decades of experience had trained him to recognize subtle warnings. Around noon, he noticed something unusual. Tiny fluctuations. Inconsistent readings. Nothing dramatic. Nothing alarming. Not yet. Still, something felt wrong. Very wrong. Across the facility, nobody else seemed to notice. The test session continued. Executives smiled. Engineers celebrated positive results. Victoria focused on future plans. Only Robert remained uneasy. As the race car accelerated down the straightaway once again, he stared at the monitor and felt a chill run through him. Because the numbers on the screen looked strangely familiar. Almost as if they were trying to tell the same story Nathan Brooks had tried to tell before walking out the door. 3 days after Nathan Brooks was fired, the racing facility looked exactly the same from the outside. The glass walls still reflected the Carolina sun. The polished race cars still gleamed beneath bright lights. Executives still moved confidently through hallways lined with championship photographs. To most people, nothing had changed. Yet inside the engineering department, a quiet tension had begun spreading through the building like an invisible crack beneath fresh paint. It started with small things. Tiny things. The kind of problems nobody noticed individually. During a morning review session, an engineer reported unusual temperature fluctuations in one of the test engines. Another team member dismissed it as a sensor issue. A few hours later, a performance analyst flagged inconsistent power readings. Again, the concern was brushed aside. The numbers remained within acceptable ranges. Technically, everything looked fine. But Robert Hayes was no longer convinced. The 70-year-old consultant sat alone in a conference room, reviewing telemetry data long after everyone else had gone home. Rows of numbers stretched across multiple monitors. To younger engineers, it looked like meaningless information. To Robert, it looked like a conversation. And lately, the conversation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. He leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. Something was missing. Not from the data. From the people analyzing it. His thoughts drifted back to Nathan, the quiet maintenance technician nobody seemed to know much about. The man who had spotted a problem before anyone else. The man who had risked his job trying to address it. The man who no longer worked there. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan spent his days searching for work. Every morning, he dropped Emily off at school before visiting repair shops, service centers, and manufacturing facilities. Some managers promised to call. Others politely declined. A few barely looked up from their desks. Nathan accepted each response with the same calm dignity. He never complained. Never mentioned his previous employer. Never spoke badly about Victoria Hale. He simply kept moving forward. That evening, after another disappointing day, he sat at the kitchen table helping Emily study for a science test. The house smelled faintly of tomato soup and fresh bread. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. For a few minutes, life felt normal. Emily glanced up from her textbook. "You miss it, don't you?" Nathan smiled. "Miss what?" "The garage." Nathan looked down at the open pages in front of him. "Sometimes." Emily tilted her head. "Sometimes means yes." He laughed quietly. "Maybe." Emily nodded knowingly. "You always get that look when you are thinking about engines." Nathan shook his head with a smile. Children noticed more than adults realized. Back at Hale Racing Technologies, the pressure continued building. A major endurance race was now less than 3 weeks away. Sponsors expected results. Investors expected results. Fans expected results. Victoria Hale expected results most of all. Failure was not part of her vocabulary. During a leadership meeting the following morning, department heads presented updates. Marketing looked strong. Manufacturing remained on schedule. Financial projections exceeded expectations. Everything sounded positive. Until the engineering report began. The lead engineer cleared his throat nervously. "We are still investigating several irregularities." Victoria looked up immediately. "What kind of irregularities?" "Minor performance inconsistencies." "Minor?" The engineer hesitated. For now, the room grew noticeably quieter. Victoria disliked uncertainty. She especially disliked uncertainty involving race cars worth millions of dollars. After the meeting ended, she walked directly to the engineering floor. Robert Hayes was waiting near a workstation reviewing diagnostic reports. Victoria stopped beside him. Tell me the truth. Robert looked at her carefully. About what? The car. Robert remained silent for a moment. Then he gestured toward the monitors displaying live performance data. Something is not adding up. Victoria folded her arms. Can it be fixed? Robert considered the question. Probably. Probably. His expression remained thoughtful. The problem is not finding the issue. Victoria frowned. Then what is the problem? Robert looked through the workshop window toward the race car, sitting beneath bright inspection lights. The problem is understanding why it exists. The answer frustrated her. Yet before she could press further, another engineer approached carrying fresh diagnostic results. More data, more questions, more uncertainty. Later that evening, long after most employees had gone home, Robert continued searching through old project archives stored inside the company's digital record system. At first, he was looking for technical references, previous design notes, historical testing data, anything that might explain the strange patterns appearing in recent reports. Instead, he found something else. A photograph, then another, then another. Old images from racing projects spanning nearly 2 decades. Robert leaned closer to the screen. There, standing beside several championship-winning race cars, was a younger version of a man he recognized immediately. Nathan Brooks. Not in a maintenance uniform, not carrying tools, standing alongside engineers, designers, and development teams. Robert's heartbeat quickened. He opened another file, then another. More photographs appeared, more references, more questions. Outside the darkened office windows, rain continued falling across the facility. Inside, Robert stared at the screen in growing disbelief. Because for the first time since Nathan's dismissal, he began to suspect that nobody at Hale Racing Technologies truly knew who they had just fired. The discovery should have brought answers. Instead, it created even more questions. Robert Hayes sat alone in the engineering archive room long after midnight, illuminated only by the pale glow of computer screens. Rain tapped softly against the windows while old photographs filled the monitor in front of him. The images came from different years, different projects, different generations of race cars. Yet one detail remained strangely consistent. Nathan Brooks appeared again and again, sometimes standing beside prototype vehicles, sometimes reviewing blueprints, sometimes surrounded by engineering teams. Robert leaned closer. The dates stretched back nearly 20 years. This was not a coincidence. This was history. And somehow, almost nobody still working at Hale Racing Technologies seemed aware of it. The next morning, the racing facility felt noticeably different. Not because employees understood what Robert had discovered. They did not. The tension came from somewhere else. The race car continued producing unusual data. Tiny inconsistencies had evolved into persistent problems. During another test session, engineers observed minor performance losses during extended runs. Nothing catastrophic, nothing dramatic. Yet every adjustment seemed to create another question. Every solution revealed another mystery. Victoria Hale watched from the control room overlooking the track. Her patience was beginning to wear thin. 3 weeks remained before the biggest race of the season. Sponsors were requesting updates. Investors wanted reassurance. The board expected results. Instead, her engineering team seemed trapped in an endless cycle of uncertainty. I need answers, she said firmly during the morning briefing. Not theories. Nobody responded immediately. The silence itself felt like an answer. Robert finally cleared his throat. The car is telling us something. Victoria sighed. That is what everyone keeps saying. Robert remained calm. Because it is true. Across the room, several engineers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Nobody wanted to admit how little progress they were making. Victoria folded her arms. Then tell me what it is saying. Robert looked toward the performance charts displayed across multiple screens. That something important was overlooked. The room fell quiet again. Nobody argued. Nobody agreed. The uncertainty simply continued growing. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan spent another day searching for work. Opportunities remained scarce. The racing industry was smaller than most people realized. News traveled quickly. A termination from a prestigious organization raised questions employers rarely asked directly. Nathan understood. He held no resentment. Life had taught him that dignity often meant continuing forward without demanding fairness from the world. Late that afternoon, he stopped by Emily's school to watch her science presentation. The classroom buzzed with nervous energy as students shared projects and demonstrations. When Emily spotted her father standing near the back wall, her face immediately brightened. Nathan smiled and gave a small wave. For a little while, engines, race cars, and unemployment disappeared. There was only a father watching his daughter succeed. Later, during the drive home, Emily stared out the passenger window. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan glanced at her. "Of course. Why did they fire you?" The question lingered between them. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "Because I made a decision someone did not agree with." Emily thought about that. "Were you wrong?" Nathan smiled faintly. "That depends on who you ask." Emily crossed her arms. "I am asking you." For several seconds, only the sound of tires against pavement filled the truck. Finally, Nathan answered, "I believed I was doing the right thing." Emily nodded once. The conversation ended there. Yet her expression revealed something important. She never doubted him. Not for a second. Back at Hale Racing Technologies, Robert continued digging through archives. The more he searched, the stranger the story became. Many records were incomplete. Some projects listed Nathan as a technical contributor. Others referenced him only indirectly. Yet the pattern remained impossible to ignore. He had been involved in far more than maintenance work, far more than routine repairs. Robert printed several documents and carried them to his office. As he reviewed them again, another realization emerged. The older records seemed connected to some of the company's most successful race programs. Programs that had shaped the organization's reputation. Programs still celebrated today. Before he could explore further, a knock sounded at his door. Victoria stepped inside. Her expression immediately told him the day had not improved. "The latest diagnostics are worse." Robert nodded slowly. He was not surprised. Victoria placed a report on the desk. "We are losing efficiency every time the car runs longer than 30 minutes. Robert studied the numbers. The familiar feeling returned immediately. The same uneasiness he had experienced since Nathan's departure. Victoria watched him carefully. "You already knew." It was not a question. Robert looked up. "I suspected." "And?" She leaned forward. "What are we missing?" Robert's eyes drifted toward the stack of photographs sitting beside his computer. For a brief moment, he considered showing her everything. Then he hesitated. The pieces still did not fit together. "Not yet. I think we are looking in the wrong place," he said quietly. Victoria frowned. "Meaning?" Robert looked through the office window toward the race car resting beneath bright inspection lights. The machine appeared flawless. Beautiful. Nearly perfect. Yet perfection often hid the most dangerous problems. "I think the answer left this building 3 days ago." Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Before she could respond, an alert appeared on her tablet. Another testing issue. Another unexplained anomaly. Another problem no one could fully understand. And somewhere beyond the city, completely unaware of the conversations happening inside the facility, Nathan Brooks continued rebuilding his life, while the organization he left behind moved one step closer to discovering exactly who he really was. The first photograph showed a younger Nathan Brooks standing beside a race car that had won a national endurance championship nearly 15 years earlier. Robert Hayes stared at the image for several seconds before opening another file. Then another. Then another. The deeper he searched, the stranger the story became. Every old project seemed connected to Nathan in some way. Not prominently. Not publicly. His name rarely appeared in headlines. Yet he kept showing up in engineering reports, prototype reviews, testing notes, and development meetings. It was like discovering fingerprints hidden throughout the company's history. Always present. Almost never noticed. The following morning, Robert arrived at the racing facility before sunrise. The building sat quiet beneath a gray Carolina sky. Inside his office, stacks of archived documents covered nearly every available surface. Technical drawings, old race reports, employee records, photographs. He spent hours piecing together fragments of a story nobody seemed to remember. At first, he thought he was simply investigating a former employee. Now he felt like an archaeologist uncovering a forgotten civilization. Meanwhile, the race team's problems continued growing. Another testing session ended with more unexplained inconsistencies. The race car remained fast, but no longer predictable. Engineers adjusted software settings. They replaced components. They recalibrated systems. Yet the strange performance fluctuations refused to disappear. Every solution seemed temporary. Every answer produced another question. Victoria Hale sat through meeting after meeting listening to increasingly cautious explanations. The confidence she had displayed weeks earlier was beginning to crack. Not publicly, not visibly, but internally. The race was approaching. Time was shrinking. Pressure was increasing. And the one person Robert believed might understand the problem was no longer part of the company. During a late afternoon engineering review, one department head attempted to reassure her. The situation is manageable. Victoria looked across the conference table. That is what everyone said last week. Nobody responded. The silence was uncomfortable. Robert sat quietly near the end of the table reviewing notes. Eventually Victoria turned toward him. You disagree? Robert looked up slowly. I think we are missing context. What does that mean? He hesitated. The evidence was growing stronger every day, but he still lacked the full picture. I think there are people in this company's history we never fully appreciated. Victoria frowned. We are discussing a race car. Robert nodded. Exactly. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Robert continued searching through storage rooms rarely opened anymore. Dust-covered boxes lined old shelves. Decades of company history sat forgotten beneath fluorescent lights. Most executives would have considered it clutter. Robert considered it memory. While sorting through records from an engineering division that no longer existed, he found something unexpected. A large framed photograph tucked behind several filing cabinets. The glass was dusty, the frame worn with age. He wiped it clean and stared. The image showed a development team standing around an early prototype race car. Some faces were familiar. Others belonged to retired engineers. Near the center stood a much younger Nathan Brooks. Unlike the photographs Robert had already seen, this one was different. Nathan was not standing in the background. He was standing at the center of the group. The people around him appeared to be listening, learning, following his lead. Robert felt his pulse quicken. He turned the frame over. Attached to the back was a faded plaque identifying the project, one of the most influential race platforms in company history. The same platform that had shaped multiple championship programs over the next decade. Robert sat down slowly. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Across town, Nathan spent the evening helping Emily repair an old bicycle in their garage. The chain had slipped loose. Nothing complicated. Nothing urgent. Yet Emily insisted they work on it together. The smell of oil and metal filled the small space. Tools rested neatly on a workbench. For the first time in days, Nathan seemed relaxed. Emily handed him a wrench. You know something? She said. Nathan smiled. Probably. You are happier when you are fixing things. He laughed softly. That obvious? Emily nodded immediately. Very. Nathan looked around the garage. It was not a race facility. There were no million-dollar vehicles. No executives. No sponsors. Just a father and daughter spending time together. Yet something about the simplicity felt comforting. For a brief moment, the worries of the outside world faded. Back at Hale Racing Technologies, they were only beginning. The next morning, Robert walked into Victoria Hale's office carrying a folder thick with documents. Victoria immediately noticed the seriousness in his expression. What is it? She asked. Robert placed the folder on her desk. Photographs spilled across the polished surface. Engineering reports, development records, team rosters, historical project summaries. Victoria looked down at them, confused. Why are you showing me this? Robert took a slow breath. Because I think you need to know who Nathan Brooks really was before you fired him. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. Not from anger. From disbelief. She reached toward the nearest photograph and stared at the image. Then another. Then another. With every page she turned, her confidence seemed to fade just a little more. Outside her office window, engineers continued preparing for a race that now felt closer than ever. Inside, a very different race had begun. A race to understand a man whose true story was still buried beneath years of silence, and whose absence was becoming impossible to ignore. Victoria Hale had spent most of her career believing that information solved problems. Numbers, reports, performance charts, financial forecasts, data always led to answers. Yet as she sat alone in her office reviewing the folder Robert Hayes had placed on her desk, she experienced something unfamiliar. The more information she discovered about Nathan Brooks, the less she felt she understood. The photographs remained scattered across the polished surface. Some showed Nathan standing beside engineers during critical development meetings. Others captured him reviewing prototypes that would later become championship-winning race cars. In every image, he looked exactly the same. Calm, focused, uninterested in attention, almost invisible unless someone intentionally looked for him. Victoria opened another document. Then another. Project summaries stretched back nearly 2 decades. Technical evaluations, testing reports, development notes. His name appeared repeatedly, not always prominently, sometimes only in passing. Yet it kept appearing, again and again, like a thread woven quietly through the company's most important achievements. Robert stood near the office window, watching the racing facility below. "I did not believe it at first either," he said softly. Victoria looked up. Why was he working maintenance? Robert smiled faintly. "That is the question I have been asking." Outside, engineers moved between workstations while mechanics prepared another test session. The facility looked busy, productive, successful, yet both of them knew something was wrong. The race car continued generating inconsistent data. The race date continued approaching, and the man who seemed connected to every mystery was now gone. Victoria returned her attention to the documents. One file caught her eye immediately. It contained records from a development program nearly 12 years earlier, a program that had transformed the company's reputation. The lead engineers were listed, project directors were listed, consultants were listed. Then she noticed a handwritten note attached to an internal review summary. Nathan Brooks recommended redesign of cooling architecture before final approval. Victoria stared at the sentence. The recommendation had later become one of the defining innovations of the entire project. Yet his name appeared nowhere in public company history, nowhere in promotional material, nowhere in the success stories celebrated throughout the facility. It was as if someone had quietly erased him from the narrative. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan finally received a job offer. It was not glamorous. A small repair shop on the edge of the city needed an experienced mechanic. The pay was modest. The building was old, the equipment outdated. Yet the owner seemed honest. Nathan accepted immediately. That evening, he shared the news with Emily over dinner. "See," Emily said with a grin. "I told you somebody smart would hire you." Nathan laughed. Apparently one person was willing to take the risk. Emily pointed her fork at him. "That is because they actually talked to you first." Her confidence never wavered. Sometimes Nathan wondered where she found so much faith. Then he remembered she had inherited it from her mother. Back at Hale Racing Technologies, faith was becoming increasingly difficult to find. Another testing session ended early after engineers detected fresh anomalies in the powertrain system. Nothing dangerous, nothing dramatic. Yet the patterns were becoming impossible to ignore. Every report pointed toward a deeper issue hiding beneath the surface. During an emergency engineering meeting, frustration finally began spilling into the open. "We have replaced everything that should be causing this," one engineer said. "Then why are we still seeing the same behavior?" another replied. The room filled with competing theories. Software, cooling, fuel mapping, sensors, manufacturing tolerances. Everyone had an explanation. Nobody had an answer. Victoria sat silently at the head of the table listening. For the first time since becoming CEO, uncertainty was beginning to feel personal. Not because of the race itself, because of Nathan. The memory of their confrontation replayed repeatedly in her mind. She remembered his calm expression, his refusal to argue, the way he had simply accepted her decision and walked away. At the time, she interpreted that silence as guilt. Now she was no longer sure. Later that night, Robert continued exploring archived records. Near midnight, he discovered something that made him stop breathing for a moment. A collection of internal photographs from one of the company's earliest racing programs. He opened the folder carefully. Dozens of images appeared. Then one photograph captured his full attention. It showed a development team standing around a prototype race car years before the company became an industry leader. The image itself was not remarkable. The caption was. Robert read it twice to make sure he had not misunderstood. Then a third time. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair. His eyes drifted toward the dark workshop floor beyond the office windows. The discovery connected pieces he had been struggling to understand for days. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to realize that Nathan Brooks had never been who people believed he was. Enough to realize that Victoria Hale's decision might be far more costly than anyone imagined. The next morning, before sunrise, Robert walked directly toward the executive offices carrying a new folder beneath his arm. His pace was faster than usual, his expression more serious. When he entered Victoria's office, she immediately noticed. What happened? Robert placed the folder on her desk. His voice remained calm, but the weight behind his words was impossible to miss. I think I finally found the piece everyone has been missing. Victoria looked down at the documents, then back at Robert. Outside the window, the first light of dawn touched the racing facility. Inside, the truth was beginning to emerge from the shadows. Victoria Hale stared at the folder for nearly a full minute before opening it. The early morning sunlight spilled across her desk, illuminating photographs, engineering records, and handwritten notes collected from nearly 20 years of company history. Robert Hayes remained standing nearby, waiting silently. The room felt unusually quiet. Outside, employees moved through the facility preparing for another demanding day. Inside, something much larger was unfolding. Victoria turned the first page, then another. The documents painted a picture she had never seen before. Nathan Brooks was not appearing around important projects by accident. He had been involved from the beginning. Some reports described him as a development specialist. Others referenced advanced engineering contributions. Several internal evaluations praised his ability to identify design flaws long before testing exposed them. The deeper she read, the more uncomfortable she became. Why was none of this in his personnel file? She finally asked. Robert folded his arms. That is exactly what bothered me. Victoria looked up. People do not simply disappear from company history. Robert gave a slow nod. Sometimes they do when they choose to. The answer lingered between them. For the first time, Victoria began considering a possibility she had never entertained. What if Nathan had never cared about recognition? What if the reason nobody talked about his past was because he never talked about it himself? The thought unsettled her. Not because it made him impressive, because it made her judgment feel careless. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan's first week at the repair shop was coming to an end. The building was small and aging. The equipment lacked the sophistication of a professional racing facility. Yet the atmosphere felt strangely refreshing. Customers greeted one another by name. Mechanics shared coffee during breaks. Nobody cared about titles. Nobody cared about status. They simply solved problems and helped people. Nathan fit in immediately. Late that afternoon, the owner approached him while he finished repairing a family sedan. Can I ask you something? Nathan wiped his hands on a shop towel. Sure. You ever work on race cars? Nathan smiled slightly. A few. The owner laughed. The way you diagnose engines, I figured it had to be more than a few. Nathan simply returned to work. Some habits never changed. Back at Hale Racing Technologies, pressure continued building. Another round of testing had produced disappointing results. Performance efficiency was dropping. Engineers were running out of theories. The race date was now less than 2 weeks away. Every passing day increased the stakes. During an executive briefing, department heads attempted to project confidence. Victoria listened carefully, yet her attention kept drifting elsewhere. Toward the folder on her desk. Toward the photographs. Toward Nathan Brooks. After the meeting ended, she called Robert into her office again. Tell me honestly, she said. How important was he? Robert did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window overlooking the workshop floor. Mechanics moved around the race car below. Engineers studied data screens. Everyone looked busy, determined, focused, yet none of them seemed aware of the deeper story unfolding above them. I do not think that is the right question anymore, Robert finally said. Victoria frowned. Then what is? Robert turned toward her. The better question is why someone with his knowledge spent years working quietly in maintenance without asking for credit. Victoria had no answer, because she realized she had never even wondered. That realization bothered her more than she expected. Later that evening, Robert continued reviewing archived materials. Most discoveries created additional questions. One document, however, stood apart from everything else. It was not technical. It was personal. A company newsletter published years earlier. The article celebrated a major racing achievement. Photographs filled the page. Executives smiled beside trophy displays. Engineers stood proudly around a championship vehicle. Near the bottom, almost overlooked, appeared a short quote from Nathan Brooks. Robert read the words twice. The statement was simple. Success belongs to the team. Recognition belongs to whoever needs it most. The car does not care whose name gets remembered. Robert sat quietly for a long moment. Suddenly, many pieces began fitting together. The missing records, the lack of publicity, the absence of recognition. Nathan had not been erased. He had stepped aside voluntarily, again and again, letting others stand in the spotlight while he remained behind the scenes. The realization created a different kind of respect, one that numbers and awards could never measure. The following morning, another unexpected development shook the facility. During an extended simulation session, engineers finally isolated part of the recurring problem affecting the race car. The discovery should have been encouraging. Instead, it created fresh concern, because the issue appeared connected to a system Nathan had attempted to inspect before being fired. The room fell silent as the results appeared on screen. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Victoria stared at the data. Robert stared at the data. Every engineer stared at the data. The uncomfortable truth now sat directly in front of them. Not complete, not fully understood, but undeniable. Nathan had seen something important, something everyone else had missed. Outside the control room windows, the race car remained motionless beneath bright lights. Inside, a growing sense of regret spread quietly through the facility. And for the first time since Nathan Brooks walked out carrying that small cardboard box, Victoria Hale began wondering whether finding him again was no longer a choice. It was becoming a necessity. The atmosphere inside Hale Racing Technologies had changed completely. 2 weeks earlier, employees moved through the facility with confidence. Now they moved with urgency. Engineers worked late into the night. Executives canceled vacations. Mechanics double-checked systems that had already been inspected 3 times. The race date was approaching faster than anyone wanted, and the pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet the greatest source of tension was no longer the race car itself. It was the growing realization that the man they had dismissed might have been the one person capable of understanding it completely. Victoria Hale stood alone in the observation deck overlooking the workshop floor. Below her, hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment surrounded a machine that still refused to cooperate. Bright lights reflected from polished body panels. Engineers clustered around diagnostic stations. Every screen displayed data. Every report contained theories. Yet answers remained frustratingly out of reach. She remembered the day Nathan left. The cardboard box. The calm expression. The absence of anger. Looking back, that silence felt different now. Not defeat. Not resignation. Something else. Something she still could not fully understand. Behind her, the door opened quietly. Robert Hayes stepped inside carrying another stack of reports. The latest simulation failed again, he said. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. How bad? Robert walked beside her and looked down at the workshop. Not catastrophic. He paused. But not acceptable either. The answer felt familiar. Every update seemed to contain the same message. Not disaster. Not success. Just a growing warning nobody could completely explain. Victoria folded her arms. Have we found him? Robert hesitated. We located the repair shop. Her attention shifted immediately. And he works there now. For a moment neither spoke. The noise of the facility drifted upward from below. Air compressors, tools, conversations. The sound of a company trying desperately to solve a problem. Victoria stared through the glass. Did you talk to him? Robert shook his head. Not yet. Why not? Robert studied her carefully before answering. Because I think the next conversation belongs to you. The words landed heavily. Victoria looked away. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain about approaching another person. Not because she feared confrontation, because she feared she already knew the truth. Later that evening, Nathan closed the repair shop and prepared to head home. The workday had been long but satisfying. Several customers had thanked him personally. One elderly couple had even brought homemade cookies for the staff. It was simple work, honest work, the kind that reminded him why he enjoyed solving problems in the first place. As he stepped outside, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. An unfamiliar number. Normally, he ignored unknown calls. This time he answered. Hello. The voice on the other end belonged to Robert Hayes. Nathan immediately recognized it. Several seconds passed before either man spoke again. The silence felt surprisingly respectful. Finally, Robert said, How are you doing? Nathan smiled faintly. I have been worse. Robert laughed softly. That sounds like you. The conversation remained brief. No demands. No negotiations. No dramatic revelations. Just 2 men speaking honestly. Before ending the call, Robert asked a simple question. If someone wanted to understand what happened, would you be willing to talk? Nathan looked across the parking lot as the evening sun settled beyond the horizon. Understanding and agreeing are not always the same thing. Robert nodded, even though Nathan could not see him. I know. After the call ended, Nathan stood quietly beside his truck. The old feelings returned. Not anger, not bitterness. Reflection. Memories of years spent building things, fixing things, sacrificing recognition for results. He had made peace with most of it, yet part of him knew the story was not finished. Back at the racing facility, another major development emerged. Engineers finally traced the persistent performance issue to a series of interconnected decisions made during the final stages of development. Individually, each decision appeared reasonable. Together, they created a problem nobody had anticipated. As reports spread through the organization, an uncomfortable pattern became visible. Nathan had attempted to inspect exactly those systems before his dismissal. The room fell silent when the full implications became clear. Nobody celebrated the discovery. Nobody felt relieved. Instead, many employees exchanged uneasy glances. Because the problem now carried a human face. A man they had watched leave without protest. A man whose warnings had never been fully heard. Victoria sat alone in her office long after midnight reviewing the findings. Outside, the facility stood nearly empty. Inside, the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. The race remained only days away. The company still faced enormous challenges. Yet another reality had become impossible to ignore. The question was no longer whether Nathan Brooks had been right. The evidence was answering that question on its own. The real question now was whether there was still enough time to repair more than just a race car. And as dawn slowly approached beyond the windows of the silent building, Victoria realized that the next conversation might determine far more than the outcome of a race. The conversation took place on a quiet Saturday morning. No conference room, no board members, no lawyers, no audience. Just a small repair shop opening for business and a black sedan pulling slowly into the parking lot. Nathan Brooks was organizing tools when he looked up and saw Victoria Hale step from the driver's seat. For a brief moment, neither moved. The morning air carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby diner. Traffic drifted through the distance. Everything felt surprisingly ordinary. Victoria approached first. Gone was the confidence that had filled the workshop weeks earlier. Gone was the certainty. She stopped a few feet away and looked directly at him. I owe you an apology. Nathan remained quiet. Not cold, not angry, simply listening. Victoria took a slow breath. I made a decision without understanding who you were or what you were trying to tell us. The words came slowly, honestly, and I was wrong. Silence followed, the kind of silence that could not be rushed. Nathan glanced toward the repair bays behind him, then back at her. The car was never the problem. Victoria frowned slightly. What do you mean? Nathan smiled faintly. The problem was that nobody was listening to each other anymore. The answer surprised her. She had expected criticism, frustration, resentment. Instead, she found perspective. The same quiet dignity Robert had spoken about repeatedly. They talked for nearly an hour. Not about blame. Not about termination papers. Not about public relations. They talked about engineering. About teamwork. About mistakes. About the dangerous assumption that titles automatically created wisdom. By the time the conversation ended, something important had changed. Not because every problem was solved, because understanding had finally arrived. The following week, Nathan agreed to consult with the engineering team. Not as an employee, not as an executive, simply as someone willing to help. The atmosphere inside Hale Racing Technologies shifted immediately when he returned. Employees who had watched him leave carrying a cardboard box now watched him walk through the same doors with quiet respect. Some greeted him personally. Others simply nodded. Nobody seemed interested in titles anymore. The engineering meetings were remarkably simple. Nathan reviewed the data, studied the vehicle, asked questions nobody else had asked. Within days, the team fully understood the chain of decisions causing the performance issues. More importantly, they understood how to fix them. Yet the greatest change had nothing to do with the race car. It was the people. Engineers began collaborating more openly. Managers listened more carefully. Assumptions were challenged. Pride gave way to curiosity. The organization became stronger because it finally remembered something easy to forget. Expertise does not always sit in the biggest office. Race weekend arrived beneath bright Carolina skies. Thousands of fans filled the grandstands. Cameras lined the track. Sponsors entertained guests. Excitement filled the air. Nathan watched from a quiet area near the engineering team, while Victoria stood beside other executives. When the race began, months of preparation came down to a few critical hours. The car performed beautifully. Lap after lap, it delivered exactly what the team had hoped for. Consistent, fast, reliable. The same qualities Nathan had spent a lifetime pursuing. When the race finally ended, celebration erupted across the garage. Team members embraced. Engineers smiled. Mechanics cheered. Yet one moment stood apart from all the noise. Victoria walked across the crowded pit lane and stopped beside Nathan. In front of employees, sponsors, and cameras, she extended her hand. "Thank you." Nathan looked around at the celebrating team. Then he shook her hand. It was always their victory. Victoria smiled. Maybe. She glanced toward the engineers. But some victories start because one person cared enough to speak up. Nearby, Robert Hayes watched the exchange and quietly smiled. He understood something many people never learned. Recognition arrives in different forms. Sometimes it comes through trophies, sometimes through headlines, and sometimes through something much rarer. Respect earned without asking for it. A few months later, Nathan continued working with the company in a new advisory role while still keeping his life centered around what mattered most. Emily. The small house remained the same. The old pickup truck remained the same. The evening dinners remained the same. Success had not changed him because recognition had never been what he wanted. One evening, Emily sat beside him on the back porch watching the sunset. "So everything worked out?" she asked. Nathan smiled. "Eventually." Emily thought for a moment. "What is the lesson?" Nathan looked toward the fading light beyond the trees. "Never assume you know someone's value just because you do not know their story." Emily nodded thoughtfully. The porch fell quiet. The world slowed. And for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Because dignity does not need to announce itself. Wisdom does not need applause. And the people who quietly help others build great things are often stronger than anyone realizes. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below and tell us about someone whose value was overlooked until the truth finally came to light. And if you believe in second chances, quiet dignity, and the power of respect, stay with us for more stories that remind us what really matters.